Okay, so in our first lesson of this lighting and rendering portion of this training, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the different light types that are available inside of Maya. Okay, so we're just going to start with a blank scene in this lesson. There's no need to worry about opening any sort of a start file for this particular lesson. So what we're going to do is take just a little bit of a break from the mech scene that we've been working with up to this point. Now we're going to take some time to just talk about some of the different lighting and rendering features inside of Maya for the next several lessons. Now once we've had a chance to learn these features and sort of get familiar at least with the basic concepts of lighting and rendering, then we'll be able to get a little bit deeper into some of these concepts and also start to apply those in a practical sense back to the mech scene that we've been working on. So for now in this lesson, let's just take a little bit of time to just sort of get familiar with the basic different types of lights that you have access to inside of Maya. So whenever we want to add a light or create a light inside of our scene, we're going to do that through this Create menu. So let's just go up to Create. We're going to create a light, and we have actually several different light types that we can choose from. Now what I'm going to do is just take this little menu and rip this off, and just sort of move this over to the side, and we'll sort of talk about some of the different lights here. We're not necessarily going to run through every single one of these, but we will talk about some of the ones that you are most likely to use in your day-to-day work. So if we want to add a light in, it's just a simple matter of clicking on the light itself. So let's start by clicking on something like the point light. Now whenever we add in a point light, it will add in a little object that looks like this. This is actually our light source. Now, what I've done is, just in the background, I've switched to a new scene where I've actually set up a few examples just to better illustrate the effect of this particular light type. So again, no need to really worry about opening any sort of a start file. This is going to be purely just a lecture-based lesson. So when we have our point light dropped in our scene, you can think of the point light as being sort of like a light bulb, where it's actually going to be emitting light out in a 360-degree spherical pattern. Now I've added these little yellow arrows here just purely for visual demonstration. These will normally not be a part of your light. Again, this is something that I've added in here just purely for the sake of demonstration, just so you can actually visually see what the light distribution pattern of this particular light would be. Okay, so if I were to actually take my light source here, I could grab this point light and move this around, and you can sort of get an idea again of what that light distribution pattern would look like. It's a very regular, very sort of spherical light emission pattern. Again, this is the point light. Going to be pretty common for indoor lighting or maybe just lighting scenarios where you want to be able to light just a particular area but emit it in a fairly even distribution. Now the next light type that we have is called a spotlight. Okay, now again, I've just switched to a new scene just to better demonstrate the actual effect of this spotlight. So this is our actual light source. This is what you'll see whenever you drop in your spot. And it really behaves just sort of like the name would imply. It is not necessarily a spherical pattern of light like our point light was. The spotlight is designed to create more of a focused little cone of light, similar to a flashlight or a spotlight in this case. So again, these little yellow arrows I've added in here just purely for visual demonstration, just to give you a little bit better idea of what this light pattern would look like from this particular light type. So this would be good for scenes where you maybe have to illuminate maybe just a very small area, things like street lamps, characters with flashlights, car headlights, any kind of a scenario where maybe you want just a little bit more of a focused area of illumination and not necessarily have your illumination carry all the way through the entire scene, which is what would happen with something like a point light. Now the next light type that we're going to talk about is called an area light. Now the area light works a little bit similar to the spotlight as far as its overall distribution pattern. So remember kind of this distribution of the spotlight. Now let's take a look at what an area light would look like. Okay, now the area light, again, I've just switched to a new scene just to better demonstrate the actual effect of this light. The area light, which we can actually see here in red, is what we would call a hemisphere of light. So whereas the spotlight was emitting sort of a focused little cone of illumination, the point light was emitting a 360-degree spherical pattern, the area light emits a 180-degree hemisphere of light. So we can sort of orbit around here and get a little bit better idea of what this would look like. So in the front of our area light, we have this little arm that sort of reaches out. This indicates the actual direction that our illumination is going to be pointing. So from this area on, we have basically a 90-degree angle in all directions where our light can be illuminated. So wherever our light points, we have illumination that kind of comes down to this area. But once we pass that 180-degree sort of back area, we get no more illumination in this backside. So these types of lights can be really, really good for sort of recessed fluorescent lights, the things that you might see sort of recessed up in ceilings, office illumination, things like that. Now, the last light type that we're going to talk about is really a pretty special one. This is called the directional light. So the icon for our directional light is going to look like this. It's sort of these 4 little compound arrows. Now, the directional light, like I mentioned, is really one that's sort of unique. With all of our other light sources, these act as one point in space where light, I should say, is emitted out from. So the point light comes from one point in space, the spotlight comes from one point and radiates outward, and same with the area light and all of our other light types. The light emits from one particular point in 3D space. Now, the directional light is sort of an exception to that rule. So if I were to back away and just sort of give you a visual example of what this would look like, again, these arrows are here just purely for demonstration's sake, just to kind of give you an idea of what that light distribution pattern would look like from this type of a light. Now, imagine with this directional light, imagine if these arrows were actually our illumination. These arrows would actually stretch all the way out to infinity in all directions. So this directional light really doesn't emit from one particular point or radiate outward from one particular point like all of our other light types. Instead, this is really just sort of symbolic of where the light is going to be coming from and the basic direction. But our illumination that comes from this light source stretches evenly all the way across to infinity in all directions. So, case in point, if we take this directional light, I'm just going to grab this and switch to my rotate tool and just sort of rotate this down, and you can get a little bit better idea now of what the illumination looks like. You can see this one light source in my scene is evenly lighting the entire scene all the way across from all different angles. You can see this little sphere, or these sets of spheres that are sitting right in front of the light source, receive the exact same amount of illumination as a sphere that rests back here. So the way that this is different from some of our other light sources is if I were to grab my directional light and pick it up and move it, you can see that the light or the illumination doesn't change at all. So what we have to get used to whenever working with something like a directional light is the fact that the actual position of our light does not matter at all. Again, because the illumination that comes from this light is perfectly even in all directions out through infinity. So it really doesn't matter where in our scene we place this light. The only thing that really matters is the angle or the orientation of the light. Okay, another thing that you'll notice with this particular light is that the light travels parallel to each other, or the light rays travel parallel. So you'll notice with something like these two spheres, the shadows that we get from these are perfectly parallel to each other. They don't necessarily spread out like you would see with some kind of a light source that was placed right here in the middle. So again, this is really kind of a unique light type. We would typically use this for maybe outdoor scenes where we want to simulate something like the sun that is one particular light source that exists out in space, but the sunlight illuminates everything in our scene. It illuminates pretty evenly in all directions. So this is the sort of illumination that our directional light is really going to be best at simulating. So we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about some of these different light types as we start to get a little bit further in our lessons and through this course. But for now, this is just a quick little breakdown of some of the different light types and some of their basic functionality inside of Maya.